In Ending Sea of Fear and Hunger Termina, we meet a new god, and we're told almost nothing about him. We don't even know his name. All we know is, he's burning in the sulfur pits. But this sulfurous god, he's actually the crux of Fear and Hunger lore entirely. Today, I'm going to explain to you who the Sulfur God is, and the truth about how he came to be. Perhaps you've heard some of this story before, but I promise you, the lore goes deeper than you think. Fear and Hunger Termina is a game about a group of people on a train who are, seemingly by accident, pulled into a nightmarish festival of the moon god Rare, whose cold gaze sends everyone in the city below him mad, eventually transforming them all into horrible beasts. As the train travels to the site of the festival, the ancient city of Preheaven, the unwitting contestants all dream the same thing: a little girl in red shoes, a nightmarish dark realm with walls covered in wooden panels, a mysterious hall full of towering figures, and finally, a strange, menacing figure who welcomes them to the festival of Termina. Perkele, the spokesman of Rare and host of the festival, tells them the rules. You have 3 days to reach the tower at the heart of the city. There's only one way out of the festival, and that is to be the last one left alive. It's your choice what happens in the time you have left. You know the rules. Do what you will. But as you can discover, it's not quite that simple. Rare, the moon god whose power causes the festival, is gone. The dark god who watched over humanity with a critical eye has long since left, but he was so terribly powerful that his mere traces still curse the land below him at certain times. What then of Perkele, the host of the festival and spokesman of Rare? If you prove to be bloodthirsty enough and kill the other contestants early, he will reveal his true master, the hidden Sulfur God. And now you've proven your lust for blood, you too can join the Cult of Sulfur. All you have to do is die, and he will bathe your soul in his endless hatred and rage in the sulphurous cage that he is imprisoned in. But who is Sulfur? Where does he come from? Who is his cult? This video will explain all this and more. Needless to say, there will be a lot of spoilers. We'll go into great detail, and I recommend playing through the game first before watching, or at least watching the previous video I made as an introduction to the lore of Fear and Hunger here. At the end, I'll offer a theory as to the true identity of Sulfur and how he came to be. While there is a lot of evidence that led me to this theory, like many things in these games, there is a lot of information we simply don't know, and the theory may be proven incorrect later. Because of this, I'll clearly say when discussing things that, despite the strong evidence, are still disputable. So, listen closely while I tell you the tale of the Sulfur God, and maybe together we can try and find the line between truth and lies. What do we know about the Cult of Sulfur? Perkele himself tells us they are the only people who are truly free. They broke the yoke of the old gods and snatched their own power, having gone through a burning death and returned to inflict great pain and suffering on whoever they please. He seems oblivious to the hypocrisy in his message though. They simply traded one master for another. Sulfur does not create. There is not a single thing shown or even spoken about that Sulfur has built. He only corrupts, and in doing so twists his cultists and, supposedly, lets them revel in their true desires. But even in this new form, their old self is visible. Perkele, like other Rare worshippers, is bound to not interfere with certain events. Pocket Cat, a Rare cultist himself, in both games says he is forbidden from meddling with what is happening, and can only use his words to manipulate. Perkele cannot interfere with the festival despite wanting to taste blood, and even hating you personally. He claims it is because they need the blood in the festival to flow freely, that it isn't pure if he interferes. But we see other Sulfur cultists getting their hands dirty just fine. Needles and Stitches, two clownish figures that haunt the city, are both Sulfur cultists. They revel in the festival and the bloody violence it brings. They don't try to hide their sins and gleefully attack the contestants and anyone else they can find. Why are they not bound to interfere? Well, It's because they weren't Rare followers before being corrupted by Sulfur. If you play as Dan, you can find out who these two were in their past life. Needles was the Baron von Dutch, the doctor who took Dan in and trained him in modern healing arts. And Stitches was Elise, the Baron's daughter who Dan was to marry. The Second Great War broke out, and while Dan was away fighting, the Baron fell into the dark arts. When Dan returned, he found the Baron dead inside of a ritual circle for an unknown god. And the grand sacrifice for this ritual was his fiancée, Elise. When Dan examines the bodies of Needles and Stitches, he recognizes them. Their bodies hadn't changed much, but their souls. They had been twisted by the ordeal of being scorched by sulfur into violent murderers. But like Percolé, a trace of the true self is found in the new. Elise was very much in love with Dan and looking forward to their wedding. But now as Stitches sews people together into horrible new forms, mockeries similar to the Sylvian marriage. The Baron, with his long career as a doctor, had a vast knowledge of the human body as well as pharmaceuticals, and now as Needles, uses drugs to subdue his prey and dismember them. Twisted by sulfur, they are crazed, tormenting and torturing their prey, pushing them and themselves to the edge of experience. Unbearable existence, the suffering, the agony. We play the secret song that echoes from within. The sound that is like razors through flesh. Can you hear it? Yeah, you can hear my voice after all. You who came with the offering. Ask and thou shalt receive. The Tainted One is a new god. With an emphasis on agony and a desire for heads, she's likely linked to the Sulfur cult, although exactly how isn't clear. You summon her by offering decapitated heads on a new god ritual circle, and she gives you a soul stone shard for each one. With enough of these, you can unlock new abilities within yourself. The Sulfur cult has many ties to the way the player upgrades their abilities, known as the Hexen. It's accessed by visiting Percolé in your dreams, or by finding one of the 2 Testique tables hidden around Preheval. And of course the Tainted One gives you the currency required to actually upgrade. The cult, through their ties to Sulfur, seem to have the extraordinary ability to reveal the potential within one's soul. Although revealing such potential requires bloodshed, the sacrifice of others. The Tainted One gives you the currency required to upgrade. Percolé lets you spend this currency when you visit it in your dream, and the 2 Testique tables are places linked to the church. We'll get into the church's connection to the Sulfur cult later. For now though, where does this power to manipulate souls come from? Percolé makes it clear when we confront him atop the tower. The souls we send to the sulfur pits, he says, are burning in the Sulfur God's eternal rage and anger. We see more soul manipulation in the process to become a fully fledged member of the cult. After an act of bloodshed and your own death, your soul is scorched by Sulfur himself and sent back to the world, changed, twisted, filled with your new master's hatred and anger. The Sulfur cult trade death to ascend to new heights of experience, and to descend to new depths of cruelty. A token of this death are the decapitated heads of victims. Many Sulfur cult members enjoy collecting or just playing with heads. Needles decapitates many of his victims and places their heads in strange places. The Tainted One takes them and gives the player soulstone shards in return. The giant statue of Sulfur behind the church has him holding a bundle of heads too. In the slums, we see a member of the Sulfur cult, identified by his blue body paint, with a wall covered in heads, who requests that you get more for him. If you do, you get a unique shield that protects against otherworldly powers, featuring mysterious hand signs that show up elsewhere in the games. There's even a ritual dedicated to Sulfur shown in the molded apartments, where a man cuts the heads off his victims and uses them to open a portal to what is known as Rare's Realm, which is littered with the bodies of decapitated people. Pocket Cat also trades heads for goods, but only heads of the other contestants. Pocket Cat is probably not a Sulfur cultist, but in the past Rare has asked his followers to perform certain actions so as to meddle in important affairs, and Pocket Cat was charged to take the little girl from the first game, although obviously he failed. For some reason, he's been asked to collect heads during the festival, but to otherwise not interfere, although the exact reason he's been told to do so remains shrouded in mystery. But it must be important. the Sulfur cult seemed to use death to grow. Bloodshed being required to grow in strength is shown through gameplay too. You can use the abilities of other contestants if you get their souls, but you can only get their souls if your party personally kills them in combat. We see his cult's cruelty and multiple institutions corrupted by his influence, but who and what exactly is Sulfur? To answer that, we've got to go back 2,000 years, back to when the mighty Alll-Mer was still human. And we need to see how a man becomes a god. At year 0, the man who would become Alll-Mer was born. Legend says that he was born of a virgin mother and a false god father, and that he was designed by a deity known as Vitruvia to be the perfect man. However he came to be, he led his 12 apostles against the corrupt rulers of his era, who responded by having him killed by crucifixion. For 3 days and 3 nights, Alll-Mer visited the city of the gods, Mahabre, and when he returned, he had ascended to godhood himself and determined to avenge his death. With his 11 morning apostles, he demolished the new gods who ruled and brought back the old world order. What happens in the intervening years between then and modern times isn't particularly clear to us. His church, centered in Vatican City, is a dominant world power even 2,000 years later, but it is rife with corruption. We find what appears to be the gigantic corpse of Alll-Mer in a tomb hidden outside of the entrance of Mahabre, although how and when he died isn't revealed. Ragnvalda even suggests he could still be alive. But what life and death mean for a god like Alll-Mer is something else that isn't clear. At any rate, by the time the heroes enter the dungeons of fear and hunger, Alll-Mer's corpse has rotted into a skeleton, and we can only see it with flesh when we travel back in time. So how did a human man, albeit a semi-divine man, become a true god? For a full explanation of the differences between old, new, and ascended gods, please refer to the previous lore video. But in short, old gods are true forces of nature, beings who rewrite reality around themselves and can grant miraculous powers, but they also have physical forms. New gods are, simply put, superhumans who are effectively immortal. Their souls appear to be bound to the grand hall, where they wait quietly for eternity after their influence fades. There have been an endless amount of new gods, stretching back even before humans graced the earth. Ascended gods have powers like that of old gods, but are born of a union between a human and a new god, and take the soul of a dead old god to ascend to something greater. The body and mind of the person undergoing ascension are twisted and transformed as they begin to embody certain emotions and forces of nature. We see this process happen in the dungeon. The god of the depths is killed, and the soul is given to the little girl, who is a child of a human and a new god. When the little girl becomes the god of fear and hunger, her birth rewrites the human mindset to become acutely aware of those feelings that are her namesake, propelling humanity forwards to invent great technologies in leaps and bounds. The young god born from this process took aspects of the god of the depths, and many of the abilities attributed to the dead god now belong to her. But that's not all that happens during this process. In Termina, there is a hidden questline. If one enters Rare's realm in the woodsman's basement, you can find a strange person there, known only as the Man in Black. He says he'll help you out, and when you leave, you can recruit the goat Black Caleb as another party member. Black Caleb is not the best party member, gameplay-wise. But if you have him in your party and sculpt a number of clay pillars into likenesses of yourself, then the Man in Black makes another appearance. Carving an idol of yourself, I see. Humanity and their endless yearning. I stood next to your celebrated Christ, Alll-Mer the Ascended One, as he carved his idol. To condense his true essence, he carved that macabre being from the depths of his subconscious. To confront his shadow, the unknowable, the imperfection that obstructed his pursuits of absolution. The Ascended One became two. That was when humanity finally reached the heights it had always strived for. Only, it was not two gods that mankind yearned for, now was it? If the other one had been dug deep within Alll-Mer's subconscious, he had to be sent back just as deep so it wouldn't obstruct the newfound order. Cast away, so that true absolution could be reached. Cast away deep, all the way down to the sulfuric pits. But which one was it that got cast away? If you continue carving idols, big enough to rival the old world order, you won't know which side of you prevails. It could just as well be you who gets squashed as your shadow runs loose. The man in black was by Alll-Mer's side as he carved idols of himself, watching his mind split in two, and saw the birth of not one god, but two. Alll-Mer buried the undesirable parts of himself deep in his subconscious with the act of carving the idols. But for a god who shapes reality as he is born, where is his subconscious? Where does he bury his undesirable things? It's buried deep, deep in the sulfuric pits, deep in the subconscious of the world. There, a hidden god lays waiting, made up of the cast-off traits that Alll-Mer shed as he ascended. His rage, his anger, his burning vengeance. The sulfurous god appears in Ending Sea of Termina. If the player proves bloodthirsty enough, they are officially invited to join the Cult of Sulfur. You merely need to die, and your soul will be bathed in the burning hatred of your new master. We catch a glimpse of his form in the darkness, a horribly burned figure, with a single eye hole his tongue darts out of like a snake, and an open spear wound in his side. No doubt the same wound that Alll-Mer suffered on the cross. Who was the man in black, waiting in the darkness hidden from reality, that knew so much about our twin gods? Remember the old story of Alll-Mer and his disciples? 12 of them followed him as he travelled as a man, but only 11 mourned him when he returned. I believe the man in black to be the 12th disciple of Alll-Mer, one who fell into the sulfuric pits as his leader ascended. Specifically, I believe him to be the equivalent of Alll-Mer's Judas. Not cast into the shadows beneath reality for being a sinner, no, but willingly as part of Alll-Mer's plan. Later in the game, if one looks carefully, several references to real-world ancient religions can be seen, including the Christian heresy of Gnosticism and Zoroastrianism. An important idea in Gnosticism is that the God who created the world is not the same as the true God, the God above all, and is in fact an analogue of Satan. This god, known as Yaldabaoth or the Demiurge, keeps souls trapped in physical bodies, tortures wicked souls in boiling rivers of pitch, and at the end of time will be cast into the lower depths. The world the Demiurge created was surprisingly close to perfect, much to its delight. But over time it noticed many small imperfections that infuriated it. It sent a saviour to fix the world, known as the Messiah, but the true God joined his son to this saviour, and the entity was known as Jesus Christ. At the time, people worshipped the Demiurge as the God of all things, as they didn't know the truth, and Jesus, intending to spread the message of the true God instead of the Demiurge, pretended to be the false god's son. Eventually though, the Demiurge discovered this deceit and had Jesus crucified and killed. Yaldabaoth is said to have been a snake with a lion face, and often shown with a spiked halo around his head. We see similar images to this in Termina. The martyr effigy clearly shows a snake with a man's face and the spiked crown, and the giant statue that is supposedly of Alll-Mer has his same crown. In Gnosticism, there is a book known as the Gospel of Judas. It said that Judas did not betray Christ to the Romans. Christ taught Judas many secrets that were not taught to the other disciples, including the true nature of creation and divinity, and told Judas that he would sacrifice the man that clothed me, meaning that he would be responsible for Jesus' death, but that it would be a good thing. Before I continue, I'd just like to clarify that I'm not discussing Gnostic lore to say that Fear and Hunger uses it verbatim. Instead, we should keep the themes of this religion in mind when considering the lore of Fear and Hunger, specifically Alll-Mer and the gods, but not apply it literally to the games. The man in black talks about being by Alll-Mer's side during his rituals, knowing more about Alll-Mer and Sulfur than perhaps anyone else we've talked to in the entire series. He was clearly a disciple of Alll-Mer, and since we only know of one that stood out from the rest, he was almost certainly the equivalent of Judas. There's something odd about this Judas, though. He appears callous, even cruel. We see in the woodsman's house that he manipulated the man's wife into betraying her husband and sacrificing herself. This doesn't sound like the actions of a true disciple of Alll-Mer, especially one who is supposedly better than the others. We'll come back to this thought later. Late in the game, right next to the moon tower, where the upper class of Pre-Hevel live, we see a statue of a man entwined by a snake. This statue is likely a reference to two related gods, Ahriman, from Zoroastrianism, and Ahriman, a Hindu deity. Ahriman, also known as Ahrimanios, was a figure like the Greek Hades, a god of the underworld, a hidden god of darkness and evil, who received offerings that pertained to mourning and warding off evil. Ahriman is a protector of horses, and his name means life partner, companion, and close friend. With all this in mind, it's easy to see the statue as a reference to the Sulfuric God, an evil god who dwells in darkness and is a partner of Alll-Mer. We also see evidence of a horse cult in the Pre-Hevel Museum. Where Sylvian had the bunny masks and Grogroth had his wolf masks, we see two more of unclear ownership, an owl mask and a horse mask. The owl mask is likely either Venushka or rare cultists, who we actually see in Termina, but the horse mask was a mystery. If you remember that ascended gods take aspects of the old god whose soul they take, then Sulfur being similar to Ahriman suggests that the old god killed for their ascension had the horse mask cult. We also see a statue of a bust with a horse head in the molded apartments, a place rife with Sulfur influence, further cementing the link. Back in reality, one of the earliest depictions of Jesus being crucified, some crude graffiti designed to insult his worshippers, shows him with a donkey's head. While it's not quite a horse, it does look very similar to one. But wait a second. Why is there a statue referencing Sulfur, a hidden god unknown for ages, in the cultural heart of Pre-Hevel? On your first playthrough, you would be forgiven for not realizing that the Sulfur God even exists. The only obvious hint is in the molded apartment quests. In fact, it's just about the only explicit reference to the existence of Sulfur, unless you happen to stumble into Ending C, where Perkele tries to induct you into the cult. But if you look closely, and spend some time examining the city of Pre-Hevel and interrogate its inhabitants, it becomes clear that Sulfur's influence stains the heart of the city. Most of it is centered around the church district, stretching all the way to its foundations. Underground, beneath the church, we find the basement, and even further down we see the foundations of rot. Inside the foundations are piles and piles of skulls, a Sulfur cult favourite. Annabella says the area stinks of sulfur. We see a statue of what appears to be Grogoroth surrounded by rotting corpses. And there are a number of links between the God of Destruction and Sulfur, but that will have to wait for a later video. An elevator links the foundations straight back to the church basement, an area rich in Sulfur imagery. Here we meet the Crimson Fathers, creatures that appear to be alien Grogoroth cultists whose business lie among humans, who, when asked what they want, transmit visions of a god that never belonged to this world. The one-eyed god who burns in a pit of sulfur. Even the crucifixes of Alll-Mer in the church, and other key locations, hold an expression of vengeance and rage, emotions associated with the Sulfur god rather than his more benevolent brother. Another emotion associated with Sulfur is seen in the Pillarman enemies, who have the skin on their heads peeled back and proclaim, "The choir of Alll-Mer, the gospel of agony." Behind the church, in a special altar for human sacrifices kept in darkness, there is a gargantuan statue that Marina says is of Alll-Mer, although Osar says it doesn't look like him at all. Having the crown of spikes and holding a bundle of heads, it's easy to tell that it's a statue of Sulfur. The Black Priests of Pre-Hevel hold soul stones, and coupled with the fact that there is a new god summoning circle in the church basement, suggests that they were trading heads for soulstone with the Tainted One. Finally, when talking with Osar and your party when you visit the church, he says, "A church of Alll-Mer the Ascended One, or at least a cool list of such." It's not Alllmer's traces that I sense here. Oh no, the decrepit priests of Pre-Hevel spilled their blood for something much sinister. Alllmer it is not. That much I can say. This isn't a church of Alllmer. It's a church of sulfur, and the entire priesthood knows and commits great acts of violence in the name of their burning god. But how can Osar instantly realise that Alllmer isn't present in the church, and Marina doesn't? In fact, she's surprised to hear Osar say this. The other characters can be forgiven as they aren't as interested in the occult and can't sense the presence of the divine anyway, but Marina has spent her life studying it. Shouldn't she feel the lack of Alllmer in the church building? When we enter the museum late in the game, the first thing we see is a statue of Alllmer, chained in torment. The description reads, "The exhibition on show here in Bohemia National Museum dives deep into the various religious beliefs around the world. Alllmer, the Ascended One, is a great example of how different these perspectives can really be when examining them through the lens of different cultures. In Europa, Alllmer is often depicted as a male with Caucasian facial features, a bald head, and a muscular body. In the Eastern sanctuaries, Alllmer is often described according to his earlier depictions when he was still just a mortal. In these images, he is often thinner than his Western counterpart and sports longer hair, closer to how he was described before ascending and losing all his bodily hair. Naturally, his facial features often depict him as a native to the Eastern sanctuaries too. Western depictions highlight his godly stature, whereas in the Eastern sanctuaries, he's more humanized. Seems like a reasonable hypothesis, with the two different depictions of Alllmer just because of cultural differences. Frankly, it's a question that would have come up a lot in the city due to the recent occupation by the Eastern Union armies. But it is suspicious, isn't it? We know there are two gods born from Alllmer ascending, and we know that the church in Pre-Hevel worships Sulfur, the one-eyed god, the liar. Now, we hear that this figure is worshipped all over Europa, but not in the East, where Alllmer lived while he was alive. Osar, who can sense the presence of gods, instantly recognizes that the church doesn't feel like Alllmer, which means he knows what the power of Alllmer truly feels like. This brings me to my first theory. There never was any Alllmer worship in Europa. It was always sulfur worship. In the tombs outside of Mahabre, we see the corpse of Alllmer, or what the party thinks is the corpse of him. Nobody who can sense powers like Osar can had travelled outside of Europa to tell the difference. But we know this is not the corpse of Alllmer, because the benevolent god is never described as having one eye, but sulfur is. One question I've always struggled to answer in Fear and Hunger lore is why Alllmer, the god of the humans, demanded regular human sacrifice for protection. In Osar's opening, we see a description of an Alllmer ritual where a person is crucified, and the area is protected for as long as the blood flows. If Sulfur was the true god behind this ritual, as suggested by the link to Ahriman discussed earlier, then that would explain why the rituals are so bloody. We see the priests of Pre-Hevel actually perform this ritual in Termina, if they capture the player, and we know for a fact they are aligned with Sulfur and not Alllmer. Additionally, we see several other spells that supposedly belong to Alllmer, but that could also easily be explained by Sulfur. Like the crucifixion ritual, the spells Blood Sword and Longinus weaponize the blood and turn it into a physical weapon temporarily. Longinus is explicitly said to be a sulfur spell and needs no further explanation, but as for Blood Sword, the description makes it obvious. The blood of Alllmer boils and rages, even ages, after his death. The spells Walk on Water and Blood Portal could be seen as abilities to join people together, but also spells to enable relentless domination, an unstoppable lord who goes where he pleases. The final spell in Alllmer's abilities from Termina is Inverse Crown of Thorns. In reality, the Crown of Thorns is a symbol of self-sacrifice and suffering for the greater good of humanity. So, just the name of this ability, Inverse Crown of Thorns, suggests the opposite. When you use this ability, well, your head is crushed by the weight and you hear distant laughter. Would Alllmer laugh at his followers for trying to follow his example? Would he laugh at them for sacrificing themselves for him? It seems unlikely. In the Gospel of Judas, it is also said that physical sacrifice only pleases lower gods and angels, not the true God. However, we see and hear of many sacrifices to Alll-Mer in Fear and Hunger. If this idea from the Gospel of Judas holds true, then all sacrifice we've seen must be sacrificed to Sulfur. Speaking of Judas, when considering the man in black and the other apostles, they also hint to Sulfur taking the mantle of Alll-Mer. If the man in black is Alll-Mer's Judas, and was told the secret of what was going to happen, then he would know that Sulfur was to become Lord. He still helped with the process. And now when we meet him, he is a cruel man, not what you would expect from a follower of Alll-Mer, but more like one of Sulfur. Furthermore, the remaining ancient apostles are described as mourning. Since Alll-Mer had returned, what were they mourning? Could it be that they were mourning the fact that Alll-Mer was indeed gone, and their companion replaced by Sulfur? In looking at the various sigils of the gods, we can find another clue as to which of the twins born from the Ascension is the dominant one. Consider the sigils of the God of the Depths and the God of Fear and Hunger, two gods from the first game involved in the process of Ascension. God of the Depths used a backwards R. The God of Fear and Hunger uses two R's mirrored in a kind of tower shape, although they're not perfectly the same R shape. But in Termina, we see a new sigil for the God of the Depths, a forward-facing R. We have one original sigil, one weak sigil, and one ascended, combined sigil. The ascended dominant god takes a combined sigil, but the leftover god takes the weaker one that is merely a piece of the combined sigil. Now, let's take a look at the sigils for Alll-Mer and Sulfur. Sulfur's sigil is two triangles and a cross shape. Alll-Mer's is merely a cross. With what we see from the God of the Depths and the God of Fear and Hunger's sigils, the sigil complexity of Sulfur compared to Alll-Mer suggests that Sulfur came out on top of the exchange. As for the leftover triangles of this sigil, we'll discuss these soon. Hi, this is Mal from the future while editing this. I double-checked the God of the Depths sigils in Termina, and both forwards and backwards R's are used. The God of the Depths doesn't seem to be worshipped in modern times like Alll-Mer is though, and the sigils seem to be primarily for the sake of humans worshipping them, so Depths not getting an updated one makes sense. And you'll see later why this doesn't affect the Sulfur and Alll-Mer sigil discussion much anyway. Back to the video. In the book Studies of Alll-Mer, it is said that Alll-Mer was a man of godlike posture, who the lords of the time had killed when he came to their golden city gates. He turned the cross of his crucifixion into a symbol of hope and domination, and he would return with his apostles to murder the kings and sultans of the time, bringing back the old world order. The King Bible about Alll-Mer in Termina makes it clear that the kings and sultans spoken about are actually new gods who were ruling the world at the time. Alll-Mer and his apostles came to challenge the ruling new gods in Mahabre. He was crucified, and he ascended. Sulfur won the battle for their spirit, and in his rage, used his newfound powers to slaughter the new gods and enact a new age of old god worship with him at the helm. But wouldn't that mean that... yes, Sulfur is the King of Mahabre. Late in Termina, we can find a house belonging to a priest of pre-evil. He discusses the golden city of Mahabre and the soulless clay statues waiting patiently for their king to return. He writes of a Sulfur Sun and a sun that blazes from underground. He drew an ascended god circle, where traditionally one can draw the sigil of Alll-Mer or the God of Fear and Hunger, but he calls it a sacrificial circle. Other notes in the house read, "After a long night, the dawn finally arrives, inviting us to the promised land. Return of the sun, return of the king." It's clear now that there was once a sun god who ruled over Mahabre as king. We know that the process of becoming an ascended god requires the soul of an old god whose traits shine through, and a sulfurous sun is explicitly mentioned in the writings here. We even see that Sulfur, as Alll-Mer, is associated with the sun in popular culture, showing up in the box of matches with the phrase, "Let there be light." With these pieces of information, it's safe to say that the god whose soul Alll-Mer claimed to ascend was the previous sun god of Mahabre, and king of that golden city. But how could that happen? How could the king of the old gods, who shape reality by their mere existing, be killed by a man who is crucified and dying? There's very, very few hints about the sun god. What little we can glean is from our understanding of the process of ascension. The souls of the human and the god are mixed together, and two new beings are formed that have the traits of each split between them. When the little girl ascended using the soul of the god of the depths, the new being created from this union, the god of fear and hunger, took the oppressive feelings of her namesake, fear and hunger, and made humanity more acutely aware of them, as well as control over vermin, darkness, and small things that were previously the domain of the god of the depths. Curiously though, the little girl didn't seem to be fond of insects, as they were given to the new god of the depths, the leftovers. So, two beings are formed after the souls merge, one much weaker than the other, but still divine by human standards. We see the raw power and divinity of Sulfur, we see it very clearly. But do we ever see Alll-Mer's? What power do we know for certain is his? Osar has felt it, this much is true, but everything we know of Alll-Mer in Europa could just as easily be attributed to Sulfur. Even his corpse outside of Mahabre. It is claimed to be the corpse of Alll-Mer, but as stated earlier, there's nobody who can verify this claim. The corpse is the Western style of Alll-Mer, and most importantly, only has one eye. The one-eyed god is the moniker only ever given explicitly to Sulfur, and never to Alll-Mer. Even the sun in Mahabre seems linked to this body. In the past, when his corpse was still fresh, the sun shines brightly on its streets. In the future, when he is completely rotted away, the sky is pitch black. The statues in Mahabre aren't waiting for the old sun god to return, they're waiting for Sulfur, who sat on the throne of Mahabre and returned humanity to a new era of old god worship. Funnily enough, as a human, Alll-Mer had a penchant for sculpting idols from clay, and I suppose Sulfur took that from their joining too, sculpting the clay idols throughout the city. Sulfur's position as the ascended king of Mahabre gives him dominion over more than any other god previously had. Before, the old gods could never truly control or even understand humans, but now, with the king of the gods joined with a human, one being could now truly unite gods with humanity. We see this in his apparent control over the Hexen and souls, as mentioned previously. But it's also apparent in some of his abilities in the first game. If one writes certain words on a blank scroll and asks correctly, Alll-Mer will grant you whatever you ask for, being physical items or new abilities. It was never explained why Alll-Mer could do this, but Sulfur's total dominion over human souls, the gods, and reality would easily give him the power to do this. Likewise for simple transmutation. Sulfur being the king of the gods means he's king of reality. It's said many times that the old gods are forces of nature that make up the fabric of reality, so it stands to reason that the king of the gods would be able to bend it to his will too. So why would the all-powerful king of the gods give his soul to Alll-Mer, so a humble, dying human could ascend and become the most powerful being in reality? Unfortunately, the exact reason isn't clear. It's basically impossible for the human Alll-Mer to have been able to kill the god, unless by chance he stumbled upon him dying somewhere, much like we did with the god of the depths in the first game. Being the sun god, his physical form may have literally been the sun, much like Rare's form is literally the moon. Even if it wasn't, killing a god and claiming its soul is a gargantuan feat. Unless either the sun god wanted to die, or Alll-Mer had a lot of help. If we follow the thread of Gnostic lore a little more, then honestly yes, perhaps the sun god did willingly sacrifice himself so that Alll-Mer could ascend. The Gnostics say that God sent his son to join with the Messiah, to corrupt the being for good, and to help people of the world understand the true religion. The rule of the old gods was waning at this point. There was a massive rift between the old gods and humans in general, with neither side understanding each other. And frankly, the sun god would have realized that he would become even more powerful through this union, uniting the humans with the gods in a way never done before. The old gods may have started leaving Mahabre at this point, as the new gods were masters of that city. He could have realized that this was a chance to bring back the true religion of old god worship, stronger than ever. Or perhaps someone else slew the sun god to feed the soul to Alll-Mer. He was a man of great destiny, that much is certain, and he had friends in high places. The secret conversation with the man in black hints at something strange. He speaks of Alll-Mer intentionally burying the negative aspects of his personality deep inside, like he knew what was going to happen when he would ascend to godhood later. But how could that be possible? We're told many times that Alll-Mer is the first known ascended god, so there's no way a mere human could know what was going to happen. But as we already know, there was somebody else involved in the creation of Alll-Mer. Someone else knew that the sun god and the human Alll-Mer could combine to create a new god. Somebody who planned the whole thing out. The story of Alll-Mer takes inspiration from the Gnostic stories, which tell of a divine builder, the Demiurge, trying to make a perfect being, but being imperfect themselves, they were only ever going to make a lesser being. The true God above all interfered with the process by joining this creation with his own son, Jesus Christ. There is a clear parallel between Alll-Mer and Jesus, and Vitruvia and the Demiurge. Recall what we discussed before, that the world that the Demiurge created was surprisingly close to perfect, much to the delight of this god. But over time it noticed many small imperfections that infuriated it. In the skin Bible of Alll-Mer, it is said that a deity known as Vitruvia was ordered to design humanity for Sylvian, who then made them from the designs. Over time, Vitruvia noticed imperfections in humans and set out to make the perfect man, that man being Alll-Mer. Although it's never stated explicitly what kind of god Vitruvia is, she is a god, and one point is made clear throughout the series time and time again. What the gods think of as good is definitely not good for humanity. While what kind of god Vitruvia is never clearly stated, we can look at the available clues to make an educated guess. At the time of Alll-Mer's birth, we know that the land was ruled by new gods, suggesting that the old gods had already left, or at least they weren't that interested in humanity anymore. New gods throughout the series have been obsessed with transcending the limits placed on them by the old gods. As the designer of humanity, Vitruvia obviously existed before them. We see that the lizardmen from the first game had their own new gods, known as blights. Vitruvia was lesser than Sylvian, as the god of love commanded Vitruvia to design humanity. At no other point is this kind of dynamic mentioned in old god relations. For all intents and purposes, the old gods are equals from the perspective of humanity. In Termina, having Dan's soul, the blank soul, gives one access to many medical abilities, some explicitly mentioning Vitruvia. Abilities from souls are stated to be similar to a star sign, and associated with specific new gods who share that soul. All these facts lead me to believe that Vitruvia was in fact a new god. It's not clear how long humanity was around before taking control from the lizardmen, but new gods appear to live forever. We even see multiple lizard new gods in Fear and Hunger 1 who have gone mad, and when asked about Nashra, the new gods in the hall say that the city affects even their minds over time. This suggests that either Vitruvia was of exceptionally sound mind, or the lizardmen were still in control when Alll-Mer was born, and may even have been the corrupt kings and sultans of the time that were slain. Though ultimately, what kind of god Vitruvia isn't that important to the story of Sulfur. What is important was her goals. Did she intend to create Alll-Mer? Or did she intend to create Sulfur? Considering the Gnostic tales again, the answer becomes clear. Jesus Christ walked the earth pretending to be the creation of the Demiurge, while preaching the belief in the true God, his real father. Compared to the story in Fear and Hunger, Sulfur walked the earth pretending to be Alll-Mer, while enacting his doctrine of bloody vengeance and worship of the old gods. Furthermore, studying certain sigils in the game explains this situation more. Consider the symbol attributed to Alll-Mer. It is a crucifix, and sometimes it is shown with his arms slightly tilted upwards, which is odd because Alll-Mer is shown on a regular, non-tilted crucifix. It's his arms that are tilting upwards. Next, we see a symbol which has never been associated with a god before. This symbol is unique because it shows up quite a bit in Fear and Hunger 1, even being given the vaunted position of being listed among the 3 major gods from 1, but no deity was ever attached to it. 2 important deities who were not given symbols in the first game are mentioned. Rare, whose symbol we discover in Termina, so that's clearly not it, and the King of Mahabre, who is mentioned briefly by the statues, but nowhere else. This leads us to suspect, but not know for certain, that this is a symbol of the long-lost King of Mahabre. The symbol is also listed among the divine symbols on the clock in Termina, but again, no further information is given. The last symbol to consider is the Vitruvian Man. The name of Vitruvia is a reference to the real-world Vitruvian Man, an attempt by Leonardo da Vinci to design a perfect man. Now, we overlay them. By overlaying all 3 symbols, they match perfectly. Alllmer with his straight legs, arms outstretched, and the head, and the unnamed symbol representing the spare arms and legs. My first thought when realising these symbols lined up was that this must be the symbol of Vitruvia then, since she was so involved with the planning of Alllmer. But she is explicitly not a human, so why would she consider herself half of the perfect man? The star symbol is often compared to a headless man, and when aligned in this manner, it clearly is. And there's 2 gods who enjoy a good beheading, Vitruvia and Sulfur. It's probably not Vitruvia's, then it must be that of the sun god who died so Alllmer could ascend. Vitruvia planned all along to join the soul of the human to the soul of the sun god. To return to a point made earlier, Sulfur's emblem is even an inversion of the Vitruvian man. The cross below instead of above, and the triangles unjoined instead of together. If we rotate them a little bit, it becomes that much more apparent. It is my belief that Vitruvia, as a new god, planned to perfect humanity with Alllmer, but the man was overpowered by the soul of the sun god. Alllmer was told about the battle for his soul and tried to bury the hatred and rage deep, but this second entity rose up regardless. Alllmer cast off his desire to rule. He did not want to be a king, and Sulfur happily took the crown in his stead, conquering Europa and the city of the gods to take his place as ruler. In his crusade, he took the name of Alllmer to hide his true intentions. At some point, long after his conquests, Sulfur died, although how and why is not clear at this point. His reign did not last long, as Valtiel, the enlightened new god of the Fellowship who entered Mahabre 800 years after Alllmer's birth, does not even know if the old gods even exist. Despite the apparent conflict between Vitruvia and Sulfur, there are some odd connections between the 2 that we see later. We know that Vitruvia is considered the god of medicine and equivalent exchange from Dan's skills. The skill Analyze targets the head of a creature, something the Sulfur cult love. Needles, the Sulfur statue, the apartment's madman, and the Tainted One all want heads. Magnamedical sacrifices body parts of the user in order to resurrect the dead. Sacrifice and resurrection are 2 themes straight from Alllmer and Sulfur's history. Of the 3 members of the Sulfur cult we meet in game, 2 are related to medicine, Needles and Stitches, Dan's father-in-law and fiancé respectively. Needles even apparently uses Magnamedical on the player character. One of the only ways to remove heroin addiction from a character is to let them die in combat and to resurrect them with this skill. The other way is to let Needles kill you, and you see a unique scene afterwards. Needles, when he was still alive, had extensive knowledge of medical practices, and likely knew this skill. But why would Vitruvia change course and work with Sulfur after trying to make Alllmer and not him? Well, unfortunately, I don't know. Perhaps in a twisted sense of mercy, Sulfur left her alive when he took over Mahabre, and commands her now like she was commanded by Sylvian in the past. Perhaps Sulfur could have been the god Vitruvia intended to make all along. Perhaps she longed for the return of the rule of the old gods, and saw the perfect man as somebody who would embody that rule. Either way, I don't think that Vitruvia's motivations are particularly clear right now. I feel a little disappointed to end the video with so many questions. Why does it seem like Vitruvia is working with Sulfur? Did she intend to make him or Alllmer? How was Sulfur killed? Is it linked to him hiding under a different name? Right now, we don't have all the answers. I do feel confident in my three major theories presented here though. Vitruvia being the mastermind behind Alllmer's ascension, Sulfur taking Alllmer's place and crusading under his name, and Sulfur becoming the King of Mahabre. I'm also pretty confident in the man in black being Judith, and the horse mask being the sun god Cult, but that's a bit less important than the others. Sulfur is a deceitful god. In fact, right now we don't even know his true name. He's referred to as the sulphurous god in-game, and his cult is the Cult of Sulfur. But it's a description of his current state, and not his actual name. We see the god of the depths still called the same after Ascension, so Sulfur's true name must be the name of the sun god, right? Well, even that's a moot point because we don't know the sun god's name either. Ancient mysteries, secrets, and lies permeate the world of fear and hunger. We are tantalized by clues, tiny hints suggesting that if we just find the right link, the right item description, we can put the whole puzzle back together. One thing's for certain, it's not going to be easy to figure out. You don't get anything for free in Fear and Hunger, so why would the lore be any different? So, what do you guys think? Do you agree with the theories I presented here? How about Vitruvia? Do you think she intended to make Alll-Mer or Sulfur? If you have any new ideas or information, I'd love to hear it. Hell, if you notice something I got wrong, I'd love to hear that too. Tell me down in the comments or come see me live when I stream on this channel. I've been thinking about this non-stop for about 3 weeks now and it's been sending me crazy, but I truly do love talking about this wonderful game series. If you learned anything new, please consider subscribing and liking the video or even becoming a member. All that stuff really helps the channel grow and I really appreciate your guys' love so far. Before we finish up, I'd just like to thank a few people. First of all, you, my favourite viewer, for watching until the end. Secondly, I'd like to thank all channel members, and anyone else who supports the channel through likes, comments, or anything else. It really helps a lot. I'd also like to thank my friend bonesjones, who patiently answered my endless, very specific lore questions, and even let me use some of his Fear and Hunger 1 footage for this video. He's got some great Fear and Hunger content on his own channel too, so make sure to go check him out at the link in the description. Another content creator here on YouTube who I'd like to thank is No Commentary, whose exhaustive videos on dang near everything in Fear and Hunger 1 and 2 helped my research tremendously. Their link will also be in the description. And finally, I'd like to thank the Fear and Hunger Discord, particularly the Theory and Lore channel. They pointed me towards some early ideas like the Sulfur Corruption of the Church, Sun God Notes in Donovan's house, and the Statue of Ahriman. Without those initial breadcrumbs, I probably wouldn't have been able to find this trail. But thank you all for watching, and remember, the most important ingredient in a pinecone pig is love. Okay, so everyone else is gone now. It's just you and me, right? Let's play a joke on them. Can you go down to the comments and say that the theory about pinecone pig was amazing? Or awful, actually. Either one. Only people who watch right to the end will get it. Okay, goodbye for real this time.